problem that really occurs is when we reach the end of that technological boom. And we saw that in the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Resistance is futile.
Welcome to the podcast,
where we explore what's happening with AI, business, automation and culture, and ask,
where on earth is all this going? Jamie, have you ever seen what happens when you throw a brick into a washing machine when it's on spin cycle?
I can imagine. I've not seen it directly, right? But I can imagine, yeah.
It's carnage. Let's just say there's no amount of fabric softener that can salvage that situation. Now, if a washing machine is a complex system, you don't have to throw a real brick into a real machine anymore to find out what would happen, which would get expensive.
Yep.
There are really sophisticated modeling systems that can do that for you in 3D.
Yep.
But what about something as complex as soil erosion or climate change or the entire economic system?
Yeah.
Could we test drive some pet theories before finding out that we've thrown a proverbial brick in our proverbial washing machine?
I think it would be a good idea to do that.
It would, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So it turns out it's a field of study called system dynamics. It goes back to the 1950s at MIT, and it's now a highly advanced science. And I wondered if it would be good to help us understand the near future and the implications of AI to talk to somebody who understands it. Now, I got chatting with a practitioner of system dynamics, in fact, as you do on Twitter, X, or whatever, with his knowledge of the Minsky software tool pioneered by Professor Steve Keynes. Today's guest, Ty Keynes, hopes to overhaul our traditional understanding of economic systems. Prepare to be assimilated into the world of system dynamics and the near future. It's great to have you with us, Ty Keynes.
Resistance is futile.
Very good. Right on cue. Tell us about how you got into system dynamics, Ty. I remember wanting to be a fireman. I don't remember system dynamics on the list of kid aspirations. And your collaboration with Steve Keynes, if you don't mind.
So actually, I got into system dynamics in a rather bizarre way. I was a production manager at a box factory, literally cartons, corrugated cardboard, whatever the name is. In the UK, you might have a different name for it. Corrugation. Cartons, boxes.
Cartons works.
Boxes.
Okay,
boxes.
Perfect. Well,
boxes.
We'll
Let's keep
stick
it
with
simple.
Simple folk.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was looking for a way to increase productivity. And I was looking at different modeling techniques. And at that time, my theory on math and calculus was good. It was on par. So I was looking at these different systems and I ran across the field of system dynamics, which is looking at the change in behavior over time of what you're studying. So kind of a temporal analysis. So I was looking at these different software packages and I wanted to address some monetary concerns as well as physical concerns. So you have your physical concerns, your boxes are moving in the factory to certain areas. You have lags, you have feedbacks, you have a set of dynamics. You also have the monetary aspects of that. Okay, so you need to make so much profit in a certain month. You need to retain so much value in inventory. So I needed a software that can handle that. And I'd found Minsky, created by Professor Steve Keynes. I started exploring Steve's doctoral thesis. And it was simply a dynamic model. And it was fascinating to me because I had played with the software, but now I had a set of equations that I could put together and it showed me a macro economy. And when I say macro, the entire economy, not specific parts of it. And I was fascinated. I was hooked, absolutely hooked, like geek hook.
And can I ask, you had a background though in this world at all? So this was something in engineering. Okay, here we go. So you got nerd sniped and you went, hang on a minute. Okay, right.
Yeah. So, and just to roll it back, engineers use another software called MATLAB and Simulink. And Simulink is a subprogram under MATLAB that is system dynamics. So you might study, for instance, your washing machine. You want to see your washer's on a spin cycle. You want to throw the brick in during the spin cycle. And your mental model, what's going on up here in your noodle, says, oh, it's going to smash the inside of the washing machine. But when you model that out and do the math in Simulink, you realize, no, the brick just goes in there, makes a little dent on the side and immediately hugs the side of the drum. And what actually becomes chaotic is the springs the drum is sitting on. And so what's going to happen is that drum's going to start hitting the side of the washing machine panel. So your mental model said, oh, it's just going to destroy the inside of the washing machine. Turns out, no, there was a whole other temporal dynamic that turned up. We call that an emergent behavior. That is really the study of system dynamics. So if you want to get into the geeky realm of
I've got to say,
what I really do.
just watching, for those who are just listening, I'm watching you describe this. I've never seen a man look so satisfied about thinking about how a brick may impact the inside of a washing machine. Your face is totally animated. It's fantastic. Carry on.
Yes.
I'm kind of loving it as well. There's something, there's something about the destructiveness of all this. It's I'm feeling, keep me away from matches right now. I'm feeling in a weird destructive mood suddenly. All right, so Ty, if I can, I'm going to ask you early on here. We've got a scale between 1 and 10 about how we think of certain applications of AI, and in the world of like the economy as a whole, we've looked at lots of different areas, but as the economy as a whole, do you, if at all, do you worry about the introduction of highly advanced automation into the economy when you look at system dynamics? And would you put it on a worry scale of 10 being Skynet, dystopian and inescapable, or 1 being, kept from Knight Rider, or somewhere in between?
So we had a discussion about this, and I've got it at number 3. 1, because I like Star Trek: The Next Generation. I was a child of the 90s.
Okay.
Make it so. But in a literal sense, if I was rating my concern on AI and its disruptive ability to the economy, I'd say it's about a 3. And
Okay.
there's some nuanced reasons for why it's so low. And when I say 3, I'm looking at the perspective of how we see AI now from an intellectual standpoint. AI could change in 50 years. It could exhibit behaviors that would, allow me to change that rating either lower or higher. But subjectively, me looking at AI now and then trying to put some objective constraints to it, I'd give it around a 3.
Well, that's reassuring. Obviously, we can't sell this podcast episode on the fear that we, normally do. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with that, Ty. But, no, that's good. But that is the thing. There's not everything about all this is necessarily even scary. In fact, a lot of the time I'm finding, Jamie, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm just part of this massive hype machine by big tech companies about something that isn't obviously scary, or, that's another issue. But I'm pleased to hear that, it's not necessarily scary. Jamie, what are your thoughts on the Skynet versus Knight Rider scale?
I'm going higher. I'm going up near the kind of I suppose the 7s, I think. And
Okay.
that's purely from a more of the automation slant of it, because that's most of where I get involved with AI and the automation and AI. But just, I suppose, from what I see on the coalface is this is absolutely going to impact jobs. Very quickly we're seeing where people are getting some kind of automation or AI put in, and people are losing their jobs. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes it's companies that are growing and want to expand without having to take on additional staff. But I guess I'm not an economist. I have an interest in the economy, but if what I'm seeing is a kind of a microcosm of what's happening in the larger economy, then I guess I'm thinking, well, what's going to happen? Because there's going to be a lot of people who are losing their jobs, potentially moving into other areas. But what's going to happen to all these people who now don't have a job? And is there going to be a job for them to go into?
As just a rejoinder there from what Ty was saying, there is an element of Ty's looking at it from a macro point of view that on aggregate, that there would be these other jobs created in the medium to long term. I think, if I'm not putting words in your mouth, Ty, but you're saying in the disruptive period, there might be real problems for individuals. For people it happens to, it's 100%, right? But overall, we might have a 3 or 4% sort of disruption to back of envelope, making illustration.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm seeing is that across our client base, there are jobs being lost as they're automating, and then as more automation and AI as the technology is getting better, and what you're capable of doing gets better, that's meaning more jobs are going to go. And whilst I look at it at the micro level, if I put that across all of our clients, for example, that's just one section, one company doing it for a number of clients. If you were to multiply that up to a whole country or a whole region, that's quite a lot of people that are going to be losing their job. And I guess the question is what happens to them? Where do they go? What do they do? And how does that impact their spending ability, their taxes, all those kind of things?
And so where, in your observations, Ty, does that go? Because we did talk briefly about that. It's disruptive. And let's say it is, we've seen this before. Is this not a sped up version of the Industrial Revolution on the whole? This is a constant thing. And that's often used as an argument to say, oh, it's fine, situation normal. We'll just carry on like before, let rip with AI and highly advanced automation because we've done this game before. And do you see that as well?
No, I don't see AI on the same par as the Industrial Revolution. If you look at the two situations objectively, and it's very hard because we're in the midst of AI now. The Industrial Revolution took millions upon millions out of poverty. Without the Industrial Revolution, in a lot of ways, you can say the Industrial Revolution was the beginning of AI. The exploitation of energy. So we had machines do the work for us. Mm-hmm. So you could almost say it was the beginning.
We've got these little energy slaves now. I've heard Steve mention it before as that term. We've got little energy slaves now instead of human slaves to a degree. So yes. So that is a big change. I'm not sure that people who were working in the sweatshops in the Victorian era in the early days there necessarily would say, woohoo, this is great. But I mean, still, on aggregate, I know what you mean. So there's no doubt that the standard of living, of course, you'd have to be crazy to pretend that the Industrial Revolution has not changed our standard of living on the whole.
I think another thing, like just in my analysis of it, I really steer away from microeconomics. So the one thing I've learned over the years, and this applies to physics and engineering too, is not building from the bottom up. So if you're a biologist and you're studying the human arm, you don't look at the atoms and you take one atom and connect it to another atom, connect it to another atom to build an arm. You simply just look at the arm as a biologist. So although you will see in certain industries, they are going to suffer from automation and artificial intelligence. On an aggregate, I'm looking at a simple first principles. You have so much output in your economy, let's say $100 of output, and you have something that represents labor productivity. And let's say it's 1. So you take output and divide it by labor productivity. That means you need 100 workers to create $100 of output. If you increase that labor productivity variable to 2, then you can see that you only need 50 workers to create that $100 in output. So that's the way I look at it in aggregate. But when I look at it that way, then I realize, okay, if you're not employing those people, they can't buy the output that AI makes. Right? So there is a short-term disruption that you're going to see. That's for certain. I will not disagree with Jamie. We will, and if we have some, like, if GTP becomes, what was her name from Star Trek? Counselor Troy's mother, the computer voice. When
You've out-nerded me there. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Geez, I wish I had really done my research for this show.
I gave you notes and everything. I can't believe you can't remember that.
So if you lay off 50% of the population, 50% of the population isn't going to buy that new additional output. And so AI has nothing to do. So that's why I put it very low on 3, because it has its own constraint. Short of AI being conscious itself and going to that Skynet level, Humans and what they desire will always be the constraint for machinery, right?
So almost like
if we don't have, sorry, go ahead.
No, if we can't let rip, as it were, because there are very obvious constraints of just supply and demand. As soon as you make something without humans getting paid, then of course, it's going to keep slowing down. But isn't there a possibility that you could easily have an economy? You ask most economists, do they need jobs to have an economy work? And actually, most of them will say no, not necessarily, because you can have large corporations selling to each other, and on paper you've got high GDP because there's all this service going on between high levels of automation, and you could just measure that and say, oh, everything's fine. But meanwhile, people are starving. So I think it's within our power to end up doing something monstrous without necessarily. But again, I don't have system dynamics kind of like background, so that's how I picture it possibly being from a theoretical point of view. But that's all. We've kind of done stuff similar to that in the past. We've had really highly productive economies that also had high unemployment in the 70s, for example. So it's possible. Anyway, but Jamie, what do you think to that? What's your reaction?
Well, I was just thinking as Ty was just talking there, and I'm thinking of, let's say, a specific example. And I know you're talking about the granular level, and I suppose that's kind of where I'm living, so it's difficult for me to kind of zoom out. But and I understand a bit about who's going to consume these things that are being produced so efficiently if they haven't got the money to be able to kind of consume them. But I guess in some of the examples that we've seen, some of the things that are being produced are services which I kind of, what's the hierarchy of needs? Who was it who did the hierarchy of needs? I can't remember. Maslow, that's right. And for example, care. So we do quite a bit of work in the kind of the care industry. So the care industry is a very fast growing industry. More and more people are requiring care. So that needs to be consumed more and more. But within that industry, there's massive kind of inefficiencies from the back office point of view. And where we're doing work, that's making that more efficient. So that kind of, one person to produce, or 100 people to produce 100 things, goes down to 50 people to produce 100 things. But the consumption of that, from where I'm standing, it seems to be growing. But I guess in other areas of the economy, maybe it's not such. So I kind of go on what Dave was saying about kind of the B2B side of things. Maybe in my mind, I'm putting what you're saying, Ty, towards kind of B2C, but I guess it doesn't really matter. It's just looking at that whole macro economy and understanding.
Well, you could end up with a scenario in which you're basically servicing the needs of incredibly wealthy people who own a lot of this automation and AI to some degree. And that's not an uncommon historical economy. They're just servicing the needs and wants of people who are super wealthy is a feudal economy. So there's people that have talked about that as a possible danger. But I do understand, and that's just conjecture, because you could end up with a scenario in which, quite plausibly, the prices of things drop so much simply because it's so productive that we all could potentially earn less, but also still buy all the things we still want. So there's plenty of scenarios in which it's still possible to have a dynamic and thriving economy, and people don't necessarily starve to death. But anyway, let's go back a step. I just want to leave the washing machine behind. There was just a gratuitous bit of air bait, really. That's the audio version of clickbait, by the way. Instead, I want you to imagine an orchestra. Okay, go with it, because Ty, this is a bit more detailed. Look at this. Traditional economic models are like sheet music in an orchestra, right? You've got your neoclassical or Austrian school music, or your Keynesian or Marxist music, or maybe even as blunt as capitalism or communism, okay? Detailed, but instructional. Now, this is the music we want everyone to play. We can't play Mozart and a little bit of jazz at the same time.
This is beautiful, Dave. This is absolutely beautiful. I'm enjoying this.
You enjoying this? So we can play Mozart?
You've set it up so well. You've kind of given all the answers. I think I want to highlight, I really love how Dave says Keynesian, post-Keynesian.
Keynesian.
Yeah, I love that. It really tickles
was when-
me.
that was when the
Considering my name's
dinosaurs-
Keynes,
I'm a Kiwi. I'll pronounce stuff all over the place.
yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll murder plenty of names that are spelt or said completely differently. But let's say you're trying to get people to play this type of music. You've got your Mozart and a little bit of jazz at the same time, which won't work, you know, but you can probably, but it's going to upset the purists, not to mention the Austrians. That's a nerd joke.
Don't upset the Austrians.
Did you see my nerd joke there? All right, because
I saw it.
yeah, good. All right. Nerd alert. Behavioral science, right? Next level in the orchestra. Behavioral science adds in to the musicians this human touch, right? Bringing the music to life with human emotions and interpretations. The point is to be in the orchestra and feel what it's like to play the music, right? The stuff of life. So this is where the world of marketing, I believe, is just miles ahead of economics, in my opinion, right? It just understands that people are not rational and we have really complex motivations. I don't know a lot about music, but my understanding is that if you don't feel the music, you won't be much use to the orchestra. Okay, so, and then you've got politics acts as a sort of conductor, guiding and influencing the performance's direction, but it's just one person. It can't play all the instruments. You know, it's a guide and a leader, depending on your thoughts about politicians. Don't get me started. So far, so good. Ty, am I getting, I'm getting to the good bit, but that's...
You started out really good, but now at this point, you've added so much complexity, and it's
that's where system dynamics comes in, actually.
Oh, okay.
So hang in there. So my understanding is that system dynamics could take all of that information, right, and then model it so that you could then look at all the inputs and say, what happens if we change some of the notes on the sheet music, or maybe we change the music, or what happens if the conductor has less or more involvement, or what if we left the musicians to improvise in certain places? What does the model tell us? And I think what I love about what I've seen from what you've explained is the ability to do all that and remove ideology, so we get to play with these ideas more freely, and that makes it such a powerful tool. So, first of all, is that a fair interpretation? And then feel free to tear it to bits and as you like.
It is definitely a novel interpretation, that's for sure, Dave. But it is accurate to a degree where you describe the different agents. For instance, I like the political agent who's the conductor, but he obviously doesn't play any instruments. You can also look at each musician in that orchestra as a bathtub that has a flow of water going in and a drain of water going out, right? And that level of water is the information for the rest of the system to react to. And each of those bathtubs are interconnected, their stocks and flows. So it's a fairly good representation. I do argue that when you're modeling something, you want to model the problem, not the whole orchestra. So there may be the brass section is playing out of tune. You don't need to model the rest of the orchestra. You've got to model, what is the behavior? Why are these brass players playing out of tune? What is the behavior behind that, right? And then you would look at data, so you'd be very inductive about it. And you would look at, maybe there's an academic paper, and this is pseudo, that describes why musicians become disruptive during music practice. And you find the paper, and it's got some good behavior plots in it. And so you would take that plot and you'd make a function and build a model. And you'd have 5 musicians, and they'd each be their own stock. And then you'd say, okay, if I paid them more, will they play better? And you model that in, and you think, okay, my mental model says if I just pay them more, they're going to play better. But then you realize, you run the simulation, let's say for 5 years, and you realize if you pay them more, they just don't show up to work. Now, I'm just using an example, but
yeah, spitballing. Yeah, fine.
You're finding an emergent behavior in the system. You would have a hard time finding that specific behavior if you modeled the entire orchestra.
Oh, I see. So you've always got to use system dynamics to, like I said, to find the problem first. But so you're often just kind of whack-a-mole a little bit, going, right, where's this problem? Let's analyze that problem. And you wouldn't want to look at the whole system and just try and play around with it. You've got to really have a problem, a real world problem.
Oh yeah, or there's no point in building the model because you wouldn't know. You need to use. So there's obvious you have a deductive thinking and inductive thinking, right? So somebody asking the problem has to have some deductive reasoning going on. They should be able to really turn that noodle and be like, that section of the orchestra is having the problem, right? There needs to be some basic logic. Now that you've identified it with some basic logic, okay, let's go to that part. Let's look at the different pieces, the different variables, model it together. Let's look at some literature, if it exists, or perform our own research on what the behavior is. Why are they out of tune? What makes them go back into tune? What makes them go back out of tune? What makes them show up to play? What makes them disappear, right? And then you look at that small and you model it. Now you get done. You find out, okay, this is what happens. This is how I get it into tune. Now you can go to the rest of the orchestra and you assume that they are all correct. So you just build a mathematical model. You take the small brass section that we've just modeled, the 5 players, and you insert it into the rest of the orchestra. Then you run a big macro test to see if it works with the larger system.
I'm guessing there's a whole world in system dynamics that is making those models accurate so that people can go and trust that the rest of the model is accurate, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of debate on that all the time. But assuming all things are equal, I think this is where it gets, for me, interesting in the abstract, is to ask, when it comes to AI and automation, what can system dynamics say about what technically happens if, a machine can technically play music and perhaps an orchestra might have, half its number made up by machines? Does it matter? We've touched on this, I know, but does it matter to the people, the other half or the audience? I mean, if so, how? I really want to explore that in more detail. Those are the things that, like we've talked about the outcomes in terms of whether people can buy the products that the AI makes, for example, or high automation makes. But what about the people doing the work? And I don't mean drudgery, but the actual work that it gets taken off them that was helping them build a community and be part of life, I guess. Not all work is drudgery.
Jamie, do you want to add in first here?
I'll give you an example. Okay, so I was at an event recently that was for lawyers. It was niche law firms, and there's loads of areas in law that can be automated where AI can help, and loads and loads of areas. And then one guy came up to me who's litigation, the kind of commercial law, and not litigation, sorry, he's criminal law, that's right. And he was like, it's great, there's so much potential here. He said, and being a lawyer, he said, I could never be replaced. And I was skeptical because I thought he possibly could be. But then he sat down and he said, look, when someone gets the police knocking at their door, for example, and they're absolutely scared, to their wits' end about what's going to happen to them, and he says, what I do, he says, to a certain extent, I'm a counselor to them. I'm there to put my arm around their shoulder and say, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And they pay him lots of money for that comfort blanket. Now, that can, I agree, that can't, I don't believe, ever be replaced. That is what I call, when we do our talks and things, the special sauce. That's the special sauce of what makes us human. But there is a lot of stuff that isn't special sauce that can and will be replaced, which goes back to the question of what happens when those people that are doing, if most of their job is not special sauce, it's just drudgery, it's repetitive work, it's, kind of pushing data between systems. What happens when those people are no longer working? That's right. And I think it is going to be big swathes of the economy. And I suppose the secondary question is, in the Industrial Revolution and the technology revolution, there were new industries, new jobs, created. Programmers never used to be a job, and then now it became a job, or digital marketing. So a lot of the things which are being replaced by AI and automation, the new jobs which maybe could come out, which maybe we can't even foresee at this stage, are they just going to be done by AI and automation as well? So I think that's where I get a bit stuck. I think, well, okay, yes, I can see how in previous revolutions, new work has started, new work has been created, but I see that not necessarily happening in this revolution.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think that's the bit that's still really opaque, and I don't know what people's intentions are, because if you have, we've talked about this a lot, Jamie, but the very human problem of AI and who actually is behind these behemoths, because at the moment the economics of developing this stuff means that it's huge, not quite monopolies, but quasi monopolies on technology, and so I guess, Ty, what from if you, it's just an opinion, I know, I don't think this is, I'm pretty sure that none of this is scientific, but what would your opinion then be on what sectors are most likely to be cutting out human inputs, and is that something that's visible to you at all? And Jamie, I'm sure you'll jump in again with this as well, if there's specific sectors that seem very clearly in the firing line for disruption.
So the first and foremost is manufacturing, and this is not only in numbers but in actual production for the economy. What actually is producing things for the economy? That is a first sector that long ago, automation started eliminating jobs. So we have tests, from 1945 onwards, even back to the Model T, so the 1920s. So from 1921 to 1927, we saw a huge explosion in mass production with the Model T, right? And we saw the after effects of that too. So here's an interesting thing when I model productivity. And it doesn't really matter what sector, because ultimately it's all one big economy. We all live and die, and we all need to get a job. So if we just go back to the greater view, what happens if you have a productivity boom? There is increased output. Output goes up, employment goes down a bit. But that new output is creating new opportunities. So employment goes down for a little bit and then starts picking up, and there's a boom. So I wanted to really articulate that two things happen. Output goes up, but employment goes down. So it constrains the new technology for a little bit, but output's so high that it's created new opportunities and new work. New workers have to come in aggregate. And so it does a little pickup like this. The problem that really occurs is when we reach the end of that technological boom. And we saw that in the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, there was Austrian economics, neoclassical economics. They like to say, the Federal Reserve didn't adjust the interest rates the right way.
They took all our gold off us.
Yeah, they didn't go back to the gold standard in the full form that our forefathers thought we should do. But really, if you look at it objectively, you saw the peak of that technological revolution hit its peak. What happens mathematically now when you slow the productivity gain is really amazing, right? Because now output slows down. Employment slows down, consumption slows down, and then it all feeds back into that loop again. And now you've got the Great Depression in the 1930s. We got out of it, and there is a solution here that we'll probably get to. We got out of it with FDR doing a lot of spending, and World War II. War II,
the end of the gold standard and the deliberate spending into the economy, spending money into existence in order to stimulate the economy through public works, which got people meal tickets.
Productive.
As long as it's productive.
Long as it's productive, yeah.
And still, the US, many people argue that a lot of the infrastructure built then, so long ago, in desperate times, was still used, or it's still the backbone of a lot of things and haven't been upgraded properly.
Can I go back to one of the things Jamie said about 5 minutes ago about lawyers being replaced?
Yeah, go on. Let's hear it.
No, it's not good. I've got my opinion.
It's okay. No, I trust me. If I had a criminal mind and the police were knocking at my door, I think I want a person to give a hug to. Okay. If my wife left me, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, there was a time, and this is very subjective here, that we had, you know, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, the nuclear family. The most important thing is you could go home to your brother or sister, your mom, or your partner, and you could talk it out, hug with them, connect with them, and that gave you a satisfying life. Like you could almost hug a lawyer. Now we have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and a tool has come along that we thought, no, there is no way a square screen can ever take that relationship away from my brother or my best friend or hugging my dad when I'm feeling down. Well, it has come. So I have to say, like, there are things that I don't understand about AI now, that none of us do, that in 30 years it might be completely different. And I was really struck about the lawyer thing. We have these preconceived notions that some things never change. And in fact, they do, and they do quite easily. For instance, we live in the time, we call it the American prac, and it's a Roman term, where we've lived now from World War II until now, where America has been the dominant power. And by the way, I'm Canadian, just for the record. America has been the dominant power, and our generations, the last 3 generations, know nothing about war and assume this will always be this way. This easy transition from technology to technology to technology, exploiting more and more energy. Because productivity gains, if you boil it down, and I know you guys don't want to go into just looking at everything in the macro, but if you really do, everything that's productively gained has come from cheap energy, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's a new rocket, right, that goes further in the space. The only reason it goes further in the space is because it used more energy to get up there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have a, when you map on the last 300-400 years of energy consumption and development as a society, as in higher standards of living. Of course, you can't not see the elephant in the room, which is energy consumption, and we've had our own energy slaves for a long time. So I totally agree. But just go back for one sec. Just help me understand the way you're looking at the Great Depression stuff, simply because it's really interesting culturally. If you look at the 20s, that people were assuming back then a very similar sentiment to now, which is that the huge uptake of automation back then, like farming equipment, cars, all sorts of manufacturing equipment, which was coming onto the scene, there was a real fear then of catastrophe. Now, I don't want to be foreshadowing some new depression. I definitely would not wish that on anyone. But there was fears of the end of, like, as in we were either going to have a catastrophe or we were going to break through into this new space in which we would have huge amounts of leisure, and so that seems to be a theme that's not new, if for want of a better term. So I wondered if you could comment on that, if that's what you've noticed when you were studying that at all, that lead up to the Great Depression. It was actually a period of huge productivity gains.
Yeah. So if you look at it temporally, there is the light at the tunnel always. Unfortunately, what's distorted with that whole situation is World War II. It's very hard to disentangle where the light at the end of the tunnel was. Would it have come naturally, let's say in the early 50s, if there was no World War II? And so we would have gone through that. The 30s would have been the lost decade, we could say. In the 50s, we had that industrial base we had built up with all this new automation, employment and output. The gap closed, and we had this big takeoff in the 50s. Or did World War II enable that? The massive amount, the industrial and military complex that was spent during that time hasn't really been rivaled except until COVID. Mustering the physical side.
Maybe with the moon landings, just simply because they had better technology and more bang for your buck. But that was also a huge technological leap, miniaturization of computers and so on.
Yeah, there was a big leap then. Now it's harder to tell there because we were kind of in a 50s boom, right? And what was the 50s boom? Why was that happening? We can subjectively say it's the results of World War II. And then we had Jay Forster was a big progenitor of going from the vacuum tubes to geez, you guys should know the names.
You're talking about the circuits for miniaturizing circuits.
Yeah. So he was kind of part of all that revolution. That's kind of layered on top of the boom we had in the 50s, right? So it's really hard to disentangle that and what that means. But my modeling it out, what I see when I introduce a productivity shock is I see a decline temporarily for a few years after, right? And then if that productivity shock, and when I say productivity shock, I mean positive. So a productivity, we're having productivity gains. If that productivity is sustained over the long term, we go into a boom. But nothing ever lasts forever. And we've seen this over and over and over again. And what happened in the 70s? We had, for one, energy constraints, which was another exogenous part of the system. And when I say an exogenous, it's separate from what we're looking at. But what also was another culprit is we had reached the plateau of, let's say, the space age. There was a time, where we had transistors and we had analog computers and they had reached their peak. And then in the 70s, nothing was happening, along with an energy crunch. And we lose that productivity and we go into a period of boom. It's not all, or a period of decline, a slump. It's not all that bad because those gains we made as a society in the 60s and 50s remain. And there will come a time when we have another productivity gain that will build on the 50s and 60s, which we did in the 80s. Unfortunately, in the 80s, our productivity gains was in the financial sector. So now we're making, we've gotten really good at repackaging debt and selling it as an asset to somebody else. And that was the boom of the 80s. And then the excess of the 90s, right? All those rich. So, but you see declines afterwards because nothing lasts forever.
And so you could end up with technology, you're hinting at the technology now could plateau. We're not necessarily going to get another winter, but you get the point where you just find maybe all the hype it does reach a point of like, hang on, this is as good as we're going to get for a while.
I hope we can edit that part out.
Is that your dog? What's her name?
Marty. I'm doing something very important right now.
I want to see Marty. Come on, we got to see Marty.
Come here. Come here. Come. Up.
His surname's not McFly.
Look at that.
That's Marty. He's a Bernedoodle. I actually used him.
Bernedoodle.
I used him as a prop on Twitter to compare Austin Powers and my dog if they had made it with a gold bug Austrian, but that's a whole nother story. So sorry about that, guys.
Always picking on Austrian economists.
Can I just pick up on something you said with about the 80s and the financial
Marty, come here.
On the financial side, as in what that made me think about was that production, I guess, was up, but it was producing nothing. If you see what I mean, it was just moving stuff around. It wasn't producing food. It wasn't producing buildings. It wasn't producing stuff, physical stuff. And I'm wondering whether that's kind of what's happening now. There's a lot of stuff that happens in business. A lot of it's digital. It's not real. And AI and automation is increasing that productivity, but increasing the productivity of kind of nothingness. Unless I've misunderstood, does that mean we're leading to a bit of a fall, or am I talking kind of rubbish?
No, you're making sense. And there's some data out there. If you piece it together, we're noticing our capital output ratio declining. So there is definitely a transition from we're using resources to create productive things, the things that people need, to we're using resources to create digital assets. that people aren't being so productive with. And so that's very cutting edge stuff because we're living in that moment. If you look at, from the year 2000 when we were all a bit younger and we were using MSN Messenger on our big desktop, that's kind of where it started, where we were buying digital products, and those digital products may have not been making our life that much better. And that's a whole real deep philosophical area. And I'll kind of highlight that, like using any AI to create a script for a YouTube video. Is it actually making your video more productive, right? Or are you just saving time and not making anything better? Like, there are some deep philosophical realms that I haven't explored because it's on the micro level. But I tend to agree right now we are probably getting to that plateau that we AI has done as much as it's going to do for us at this point, and there might be another revolution in the 2030s. I'm not excluding that, and that will flatten out, and any gains we're getting from it aren't really substantial. That I'm speculating. That is a subjective. Like, I don't have the crystal ball. I don't have it. I want it because my day trading would be so much better. But I don't have it. But I speculate like we're kind of in that stage right now.
And Jamie, you what are your immediate thoughts on that? Because to you, I get the impression it doesn't feel like that, but that because you may not have you're very close to it. What do you think?
Well, I think so. I agree with what you're saying about the kind of the ChatGPT, for example, the AI bit of it. Funnily enough, I was just using ChatGPT to do some script work, Dave, on what we've been
very
talking
good.
about.
Yeah. I've converted you.
Yeah, and I think to myself, okay, going on what Ty just said, okay, how by me saving 2 hours of my life by doing that, am I spending the other 2 hours doing something productive that will create something productive? Yeah, I think in some ways it does, or maybe it just means I spend another half an hour on Facebook, which I wouldn't have done before, so which is totally unproductive. But yeah, I keep kind of coming back to this thought of kind of what, and I often think about the kind of the 80s in the financial sector in the UK, and kind of like we don't as a country really produce anything except kind of rich bankers, and kind of, is that good for society as a whole? And it was actually, I just want to pick up on another couple of things as well. So the other thing that also came about with the chat with the lawyers, but also comes about with some of our accountant clients. So traditionally in those professions, you would have young, kind of trainee accountants, trainee solicitors, it could be surveyors, it could be, any profession. And they, in old language, they would do articles, they would go and work in a company for a year or two whilst doing all the donkey work, accountancy, bank reconciliations, all those kind of things, to learn the ropes, where eventually they do their qualifications and then slowly work up to partner level. And a couple of the guys that I work with who run accountancy firms, not small ones, not massive, but kind of mid-size, are saying they absolutely want to use automation and AI to do a lot of this stuff. But they're trying to balance that with the fact that all the students that come in to do this training won't have anything to do. Where are they going to learn? And it's the same with the solicitors. They said the same thing. How are they going to learn the kind of the ropes, the drudgery part to help them get up to the higher level? So that's something that kind of I think about as well in terms of how this is affecting kind of downstream the workforce.
Well, let me link all of this to a last set of questions I've got for Ty about sort of some of the exact policy things, so we could get practical about how you might help mitigate any disruption and enhance productivity. Recently, we got a Thermomix. It's for those that don't know, it's like a cooking device that's kind of like a mixture between a casserole dish, a mixer, and perhaps a blender. And it's quite incredible the number of things you can do in it, okay? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a pretty capable cook and I love cooking. So friends had it and I thought, that's a pretty amazing device, but it's just another gadget you're going to get. However, having chatted with this couple have got one, and they did a little display dinner thing, would have been fun actually. Made cocktails in it, made sauces, made some really nice salads and everything, and really quick too. So we're just chatting while they were doing it.
Can I just interject quickly, Dave?
Yeah,
just Ty, you're getting a view here into middle class Britain.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like right here.
Yeah. Thermomixes and and margaritas. So, so basically, we decided, right, we're going to get one because there's a few things that went on with it that are outside of the automation thing. But I'm going to come back to in a sec. It's super efficient, so we're going to hardly use our oven anymore because it does the cooking really quick. And also, and this is crucial, the kids were super excited about it. So they're actually fighting over who makes dinner. So I've got 2 teenagers that now fight over who makes dinner. Now, admittedly, it's not like learning to be a cordon bleu chef. You're not going, because it does a lot of the steps for you. You're dumbifying, if you want, dumbing down, the cooking skills. But, and this is the crucial thing, I think, what's the outcome? You get really nutritious food cooked from scratch, so there's no preservatives, so the nutritional value goes up. And then the kids get interested in cooking. And so they do want to do now, later on, they get the process and they can go backwards. So to your point, Jamie, about the accountants that are learning this way, it might be that automation gives them the full view of what's supposed to happen in the process, and then they get interested perhaps for other reasons because they don't need to do it economically in the how the stuff was put together. In the same way that I got very interested in the original filmmaking processes that Charlie Chaplin and all those sorts of people did when I was learning about filmmaking with my directing mentor. I didn't need to learn it because we were in digital. We don't need to look at film and why the cameras had a gate and they had to check it every time they I didn't need to know that. But it's really fascinating and helps inform and make richer all the rest of the processes. So I'm much more optimistic that there's a lot of things that we can introduce that aren't going to take away our humanity. But, I just wanted to sort of make a real world example of where automation can get introduced, do a whole lot of good things, and still with efficiencies and not necessarily take away from it's a nice thing to cook. But this gives a really good tool that did a lot of good things, and I think the kids will now be interested in cooking because of it. And so that brings me on to what strikes me about what you've been saying, Ty, is that you've got a pretty clear idea that in aggregate, automation won't smash and grab the economy and leave everyone jobless, even if there are disruptions in certain sectors. But yet I know that you have when you come to certain policy prescriptions, there's 2 that stand out for you that you think ought to be in place. And one is a job guarantee. I'm going to get you to explain that just very briefly. And the other is a UBI. And I find it interesting because you've arrived at those pretty specific policy recommendations, which tend to support people economically. And I guess, has your study of system dynamics led you to that conclusion? Or is it more a worldview thing that you would recommend even without advanced AI and automation in the mix? So I'm curious because you don't strike me as much of a political animal, and yet both of those things are loaded with politics for most people.
So for the UBI, I don't see it as a use case to address concerns about AI causing business cycle fluctuations, we'll call it. That's what I think AI does. What my concern is do we have enough energy left to continue the growth? And if we are starting to reach those constraints, and I have no idea how much fossil fuels left in the ground. Nobody really does. I don't know if we can create enough solar panels and wind farms to offset the use of fossil fuels. I don't know, because I don't know if we have enough resources to build solar panels or wind farms or tidal generators. But I suspect there is a hard limit for us on this planet to create a flow of energy that is ever increasing, and that eventually we're going to actually just need people to stay home and live healthy lives with their families and maintain a population. And the only way we can do that and have a compelling instrument that doesn't make people rebel against the social norms, our institutional norms, is providing them with a stable income where they can go out and buy output that we still create in our economy. And I imagine moving forward, the stuff that we create in our economy, as resources become more limited, the stuff we create will become more important and more directed, i.e., food, healthy food, shelter, basic shelter. That's what I see a UBI for. It's more of a multi-generational thing if you look at the constraints of living on our planet. Jay Forrester, the progenitor of system dynamics, his biggest contribution was The Limits to Growth. And The Limits to Growth was a book in 1972 that took multiple variables and looked at the global system and said, okay, if we truly have a finite amount of resources, we can only divide the pie into so many small pieces with productivity gains. There comes an end where we cannot grow anymore. And eventually that comes. We have to make the decision, do we want to maintain stable or do we want to do a collapse and just ignore the issue altogether? And that's where I think a UBI is very important. As for the job guarantee, I see it as a possibility on a local level. So we need community gardens, right? We need to actually kind of dial things back and learn how to garden again. Gardens have disappeared, backyard gardens, right? Because we've become accustomed to mass production and boxed food. Job programs, local job programs can employ people in those needed areas, i.e., it could be to address homelessness. People shouldn't be, in the 21st century, nobody should be sleeping on the sidewalk while a rich person drives by in his Ferrari. That doesn't make sense. There's something wrong there. There's a disconnect. If we are that civilized species, why is that happening? AI could probably help us in those areas, right? Finding solutions that we couldn't think of with our own human minds. But that's where I see a job program, which varies from the traditionalists that see a federal job guarantee, which I find is it might be a squandering of raw resources versus just having people stay at home on a UBI and do the things they love to make their community better. So that's kind of my view on UBI. It's a little bit, it would help if we do have such a technology and we move from the Star Trek AI to the Skynet AI. And like I said, I don't know what happens. We can't fathom what happens in 2050. If, God forsaken, that gets to that point, a UBI would be very important at that point because that would be hugely disruptive. And we're talking 50% of the population's laid off, the working population. That would be catastrophic. Things might come into balance 10 years later, but during that time, the government would probably have to step in and have direct payments, not to firms and corporations, but directly to the people. So they have an ability to go into the marketplace and purchase food.
But your default was, just to pick you up on what you said earlier, your default was more that it's a 3, it's unlikely to be a problem. But you're saying just to mitigate, it's a nice insurance policy for you in many ways, UBI, as a policy option to make sure that things don't, collapse.
Yeah. I've thought, I've modeled a few variations because I got a new national model. I'm writing a book on it right now. I've modeled a few variations of a UBI. And one of the variations that really interests me is a moving target UBI. So everybody's included. Some areas, so the higher income people would be taxed. There's no point, but we have to be. Here's the thing with the UBI, and this is one of my beliefs. You might disagree, Dave, because I know you're in these circles too. The whole issue with a universal basic income is it's universal. And when you say universal, now it becomes politically palatable, right? You can go to your MP and say, well, everybody's going to get it, even your bros, right? Even your mom, even your grandma, right? Even your child. Everybody's going to get it. It makes it more palatable. But I also know just pumping a steady state of money into an economy, and I hate to get into the Milton Friedman or neoclassical stuff because I'm fervently against that stuff, is inflationary. Right? You do ultimately get too many dollars chasing too few goods. So you have to kind of be careful and balance that. So
Yeah.
I
don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, I think, I was wondering because there are, I'm not a UBIer, I'm not a job guaranteer. I've always tried to be in the middle and just look at the policies and see, okay, how does this work in a dynamic system? And how could I make it better so it makes more sense? So
you're the
see
guy
a
with
moving,
you're the guy with the levers, the sensible, like modeling it to me is like what UBI should not be just some like, let's go, there's the number. It should be like modeled and here's the levers and here's what happens when we do it. But make sure that the structure is in place so that if there is a problem, we can, if we need to turn that lever up. But at the moment, there's just nothing there. And I think that's really irresponsible given the potential of AI and automation personally.
I'll leave it at the final thing is that there is no one policy and there's many. Like I want to see basic services for people. I live in Canada. I know you guys have pretty good like social services in the UK. I think all Commonwealth nations do.
Well, that's
problematic. I know you've got. I know you got problematic issues with the healthcare system, but if you look at it compared to the United States, you guys are blessed. In Canada, we have issues with the healthcare system, wait times, but we're blessed. I can break my arm and it does not cost me any money. I don't know. Do you guys break a bone there? Are you covered?
Anything's covered.
You're not going to get bankrupted for a medical
emergency. Right? So those things need to be in place in a nation first and foremost, I think. Those things, those universal human standards that the state is going to provide you protection to your body, those should be in place. Then you start looking at monetary protections, right? It could be a UBI. It could be an employment program, right? It could be a training program. Right? Maybe, so here in British Columbia, one of the provinces in Canada, we're addressing AI. We're really looking at providing free training on AI. Now, it's kind of superficial at this point, but we kind of brought up the point that it's the new lawyers coming up, the paralegals, we call them in Canada. They're coming up and they don't have any jobs to do because AI is doing all the work for them. But really, we should adjust our thinking. And this is an institutional change. We see this in schools. So people are using Chat GPT to do their essays, and schools don't know how to handle this because we're so rigid in our institutional thinking, the way something should be. We're not willing to change it. So really, if we start changing our institutional practices, we can integrate AI, and it's not that disruptor like we're talking about with the lawyer not having anything to do. And Dave said, well, maybe there are things to do. We just need to integrate it with the institution.
And Jamie, last thoughts from you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think that we're making the assumption here that the government should be doing what's right for the society, serving the society and doing that. I think in the UK at the moment, it definitely doesn't feel like that at all. I'm not sure, Ty, have you ever watched Gary's Economics? I don't know if you've seen this guy.
Is his last name Stevenson?
Yeah.
Yes, Gary Stevenson.
I think I have. And he's got shorter hair, blonde hair. I think I've seen him.
Yeah, kind of like shaved. Yeah, he's an ex-trader. And he's got a book called the Trading Game. So he's an ex-trader, and then kind of, he's got some very, very interesting ideas, and I kind of agree with a lot of what he's saying, which is effectively the kind of the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and that divide is getting bigger and bigger. And I guess when you think about it from a governmental point of view, often, at least in the UK, a lot of them are, it's part of a big club, and they have no motivation to kind of share that or bring that down to a society level. But I kind of also, and I agree with what you're saying about what, say, British Columbia is doing in terms of the educating people about this. I absolutely think that's what should be happening here. This is a revolution. We can see it's a revolution. We all agree it's going to be a revolution. Let's try and allow everyone to benefit from that revolution and find ways that we've talked about this before as well, Dave, kind of like town halls, town halls to kind of work out how this is going to impact all these different types of industry and find ways for them to benefit from it.
But I wonder how widespread Ty's view there is that we are reaching a plateau of the current iterations or not. And I mean, it's not provable either way. I'll be honest, I've no idea. But I wonder how widespread that is. I think most people, though, from my I mean, it's all straw poll stuff here, but there seems to be, if there's any thought about AI at all, and people are often too busy to think about these larger issues, they think, oh well, it's going to be a problem, but it's hard to define. So yeah, I was just intrigued, Jamie, what your thoughts are on what Ty was saying about whether or not we've plateaued for this version of AI, and we'll have to wait another 20 years for the next big jump.
I don't think so. Again, just in our experience, it's evolving extremely quickly. Some of what was possible even 6 months ago that we can do now wasn't available 6 months ago. And as quickly as we kind of get on that, and it's really interesting. We just opened up ability to do some new things through one of the new services, and there's a list of 20 different things that we can now do and use, and you can see that happening, and it's happening more often, more quickly, and it's just kind of pushing the boundaries of what's happening. So I don't necessarily think we've plateaued. I think it takes time for the real world and for businesses and ultimately consumers to start using these new things. But from our point of view, we're selling services to help companies use this. So therefore we're pushing this, and we're one of, thousands of companies doing the same thing. And it's like a snowball. It's starting to really start to roll.
So it's already baked in to some degree, the big changes we haven't necessarily seen because they haven't really been utilized to the full. Even that wave is the one that Mustafa Suleiman seems to talk about in his book, The Coming Wave, that, this stuff is baked in. It's going to go exponential, not because of new stuff, it's because it's the stuff that's already been developed.
Yeah, and what Mustafa Suleiman says is that it is human nature to want to try new things, to kind of go after the shiny stuff, but also try these new technologies.
Very good.
I agree actually with Jamie's summarization there. So I want to, before I know Dave will make some really good sound clips of completely destroying my character. That's what I expect.
I'm going to put your voice into an AI, and we're just going to get you to say whatever we want. I mean, this is the only reason you're on, Ty. Right? Yeah.
So I agree with the statement that the technology is baked in. I'm not saying a plateau of use cases. So what's been developed, there is going to be a lag where people, different industries and companies decide, okay, now how can we use this technology to improve? What I am saying is we might, and again, this, like I said before, is a very subjective because no human knows.
No one knows.
We might be at a plateau right now with the technology, i.e. the interface with Chat GPT. That might be as good as it gets for 10 years before, let's say, quantum computing becomes viable and takes AI to the next level, where we're moving from Deanna Troy's Star Trek mother voice to, Skynet, which actually was a far worse voice.
Yeah, that's the worst
depending on
one.
which movie
to
you watch.
Knight Rider. Ideally, we want Knight Rider. Skynet, fun for a day, really interesting to watch everything blow up, then a big problem. So, no, we're after Knight Rider, ideally. Just to confirm to listeners, the show is about getting to Knight Rider, not to Terminator. All right, well, look, I think it's a great place to leave it. And I really appreciate you coming on. Ty, just quickly, is there any obvious place that people can find you on social media, or on maybe just a good plug for the live stream with Steve Keen here as well?
Well, we've got TyKeynes.com. I put out a lot of blogs on there. I put out some of my mathematical models on there. So if you're interested in downloading Minsky, which is free, just Google it on Google. You can kind of look at what system dynamics is. You can find me on youtube.com/@TyKeynes. You can find me on Twitter, now known as X, @TyKeynes. You can find me on LinkedIn @TyKeynes. I just don't think there's an @ on LinkedIn, so just Ty Keynes. Yeah. Oh, and you can find me on my Patreon, patreon.com/TyKeynes. So I'm all over there, or you can just Google me with the Google search bar, Ty Keynes. You can Chat GPT me. I don't like the information that it gives, but you can find me on there too.
Yeah, believe me, I tried that too, and I was like, okay, that's not as useful as I was hoping. So I had to actually do some research. And I knew you anyway, so it was pretty easy. But yeah, Ty, it's been an absolute pleasure. thank you for being on. I think we're going to have to revisit this because you've baked my noodle. I'm going to have to go back and think, what else do I want to ask Ty? Because there's a load there under the hood. I'm quite sure we didn't explore that we should in future. So thank you so much for being on. Great to have you. Jamie, any last thoughts? Any last questions?
I thought you wanted to get him back on to ask him about your air fryer. That was going to be the next.
I'm not getting an air fryer now. There's far too many appliances. It's all. I've yet to work out this damn Thermomix first, and then I'll see how I go. Very good. All right, good to chat, you guys, and talk again soon. Take care for now.
Resistance